We are here today to stand up, raise our voices against the very ill-advised proposal to place F-35 military jets in the middle of our dense residential community here in Madison. I represent some of the neighborhoods most impacted, including the Carpenter Ridgeway neighborhood, which is an affordable, diverse neighborhood that we should be nurturing and encouraging and protecting, not entertaining proposals to substantially disrupt and potentially destroy. 90% of the constituents who have contacted my office expressing an opinion about these F-35 jets have been in opposition. Make no mistake about this. The people impacted, the communities impacted, very clearly oppose this very misguided proposal. This is not about whether we support people who serve in our military. My father was a veteran, my grandfather was a veteran. This is about where are we an appropriate venue for these planes? And I think this final EIS, again, confirms to us some of our worst nightmares, and it does confirm that we are not the place for these jets. And this final EIS does solidify some of the most negative consequences for our community, which, by the way, are some of the most negative, harmful consequences of any of the 5 sites being considered. The most negative, harmful consequences for Madison out of any of the 5 sites being considered, including over 2,200 individuals are now going to be in a zone deemed potentially incompatible for residential use. What that really means is you're not going to want to live in these zones. Who wants to live in a place where you can't open your window or your door, or your kids can't play outside? Is that the community? Is that the neighborhood people want to live in? If people are able to obtain federal help in doing some mitigation, what we know is, first of all, it's a big if. A lot of people aren't going to be eligible, and it's going to take years, if not decades. We also know that the initial military jet operations are going to increase 47% for an unspecified amount of time. That is, again, confirmed in this final EIS. And we know the serious increase in noise that our communities are going to experience are going to have a significant disproportionate impact to low-income and minority populations as well as children, resulting in environmental injustice to these communities. And again, this is one of the most severe consequences of any site being considered, and it will worsen the severe racial inequities that already plague our city and our county. Why on earth would we want to do this? Despite repeated requests, I alone have made 3 to the Air Force. They again fail to provide basic information to our community. Here is a chart. This was provided to Burlington, Vermont, which is the latest site to get these planes. And they're somewhat similar to us. They're an Air National Guard base. Their airport is in a more residential community. But I want to point out this is a measure of the noise difference between an F-16, which we currently have, and an F-35. And this is sound exposure level. It's one of the most accurate predictions of noise because it measures not just the intense noise, but the duration of the noise. 17 decibel difference. What this means is, what this chart shows is that these F-35 planes are 17 decibels louder. What that translates into the human ear is 4 times louder. Do not believe the lie by the proponents that these jets are not louder. I have heard them with my own ears. I have been to Luke Air Force Base. They are the loudest things I've ever heard in my life. Don't believe the lie, okay? We were not provided this. What is the Air Force hiding? Why wouldn't they provide this kind of comparison? I asked for it many times. Many of you standing behind me, and let me tell you, this is a big coalition behind me. These are members of our community that have come together. We asked for this information. They refused to provide it. What is the Air Force hiding? That is my question. What are they hiding? The other really harmful impact that has been, I think, not fully explored is the impact in regards to PFAS contamination. These are these forever chemicals. We know there's contamination on the Truax base. It's spread to our lakes. It's spread to our waterways. A city well has been shut down. The State Department of Natural Resources has urged the public to not eat fish out of Lake Mendota or Starkweather Creek. These are forever chemicals. They are very difficult to get rid of. Well, the final EIS lists only 3 sites that have potentially released these horrible pollutants into the environment, our lakes and our creek. But the Air National Guard has yet to complete a full site investigation and they don't know the extent of this contamination. So the full impact of digging up acres of contaminated soil, which is what the Air National Guard is proposing, is also unknown. It also could have severe consequences for our community in terms of pollution that's getting into our lakes and our waterways. For the sake of access to clean water alone, this proposal should be stopped. It's absolutely ridiculous. The cost and harm is just too great to our community. We will not risk our clean water. So who is pushing this proposal? It's certainly not the communities being impacted. As I have said, those who've contacted me vehemently oppose. Who's pushing this is a network of Madison corporate power structure that seems more concerned about getting maybe military contracts and increasing corporate profits than protecting the health and vibrancy of our communities. That who really is behind this proposal. So I am really urging everybody to call your elected officials, raise your voices, tell them you do not support this, that this is a bad idea for our community. And I would say this as well, that every elected official has a voice in advocating for our community. If you do not have a voice, do not run for public office. You have a voice, use your voice.
If this was put on over by Maury, would this have already been quashed because people have more income and since you refer to this as a low-income area?
Well, it's interesting. I think it's going to impact a lot of people. I think it's going to impact everybody who lives on the isthmus and on the north side. So I don't think it's just going to impact low-income people, but the disparate impact is significant. We know the people most impacted are the people who can at least afford to be impacted and least afford to move. So that is significant, and if you look at the 5 sites being considered, it's one of the most severe negative consequences. This disparate impact, this environmental injustice is the most severe for our site. So you have to question, why on earth would anybody think that we're a good site? When you look at the water contamination that is yet to be resolved, but we know we've hit the tip of the iceberg with the contamination, it's probably much worse. We know, looking at their own data, that these planes are louder. And this is a point to make too. Military planes, they've not gotten quieter. They've gotten louder, unlike commercial aircraft. They've gotten quieter over the decades. Why they've gotten louder is because there's more stuff on them. And you can bet over the next decade, these F-35s are going to get heavier, they're going to be harder to get in the ground, and they're going to get louder. That is what military experts I've talked to have said. So these are just going to get louder, these jets, most likely. And here is some of the data that shows how much louder they are. So on every single measure that you look at, we have the consequences of profound negative impacts. We are not an appropriate site. We are not an appropriate site. And that is what we're trying to get people to look at. We're trying to get people to look at the data, look at what the report says, talk to the experts, look at the community response. That's what we should be looking at. When we met with Assistant Secretary Henderson back last year, he promised us that the voices of our community would matter. So we are calling on him to listen to the voices and hear the voices for our community. We don't want to destroy our neighborhoods. We don't want to degrade our quality of life. We want to improve people's quality of lives. That's what we should be focused on, not this.
Yeah, so the State National Guard has provided the mayor's office some information that contradicts the EIS, the final EIS, in terms of the number of operations.
Look, they provided...
Does that concern you or alleviate your concerns?
No, it does not concern me. We have not, I don't think we're getting correct information from the Air National Guard, and they're not the ones to make the decision. Let's be real clear. They provided probably that same information to the Air Force, and the Air Force rejected it. The Air Force affirmed that the number of operations is going to go up 47%, at least initially. We don't know how long that is. That's part of what contributes to this increased noise. We're going to have more operations. We're going to have more planes flying at once. We don't have any information about the sound of simultaneous takeoffs of 8 planes at once. When I was in Arizona, I heard 5 planes at once. You cannot comprehend the noise. You do not understand it until you hear it, and then you understand the big problems. So we don't have that information. But no, the Air National Guard has been saying these things, but honestly, at the end of the day, the Air Force makes the decision. So I know the Air National Guard provided the Air Force with this, the data, because they've been talking about it, and guess what? The Air Force rejected it. You know, here in the state legislature, the Republicans have cut shared revenue for localities, and they've restricted the abilities of cities to raise their levy limits. There is not a lot of wiggle room here in new income for the city of Madison, or the county for that matter. Are you seriously going to entertain a proposal that we know is going to introduce by the millions at the most conservative with a real suspect methodology that was used in the EIS? Are you really going to tout a proposal that could reduce your tax revenue by millions and millions of dollars when there's such a limited opportunity to make that up?